If you detached from an avoidant and didn't come back, and now you're wondering if you ever mattered, I need you to slow down and listen, because that question is not proof of your weakness. It's proof of how deeply your nervous system was trained inside that dynamic. When you love someone who goes quiet, your mind becomes a detective. It searches for reasons, it replays scenes, it reads between lines, it tries to solve the silence like a puzzle. And when you finally detach, the puzzle doesn't disappear, it gets louder for a while. Because you're no longer numbing the uncertainty with contact. The most painful part is that an avoidant can look calm while you feel shattered. They can look normal while you feel like your chest is carrying a storm. And your mind makes a brutal assumption. If they can lose me and look fine, then I meant nothing. But that's not how avoidant coping works. Many avoidants don't process loss with visible grief at first, they process it with control. They clamp down, they distract, they get busy. They tell themselves stories that keep them from feeling. And those stories can be convincing, not because they're true, but because they reduce discomfort. So if you're reading their silence as a verdict on your worth, you're confusing their defense with your value. Here's what's really happening inside you when you ask, "Did I matter?" Your system is craving proof. Proof that you weren't foolish. Proof that your love wasn't wasted. Proof that you weren't disposable. Because detachment can feel like walking away without a receipt. You don't get the neat closure of a confession. You don't get the movie moment where they run after you. You just get quiet, and quiet can be unbearable when you've been conditioned to believe love must be chased to be real. But the truth is, returning over and over never proved you mattered. It only proved you were available. It proved you could be pulled back by uncertainty. It proved you could be reached with minimal effort. And I'm not saying that to shame you, I'm saying it to free you. Because availability is not the same as being cherished. Availability is not the same as being chosen. Availability is not the same as being protected. In many avoidant dynamics, your constant returns become the cushion that prevents reality from landing. As long as you came back, even in small ways, just checking, "I hope you're okay," a polite reply to a breadcrumb, the avoidant never had to face the full consequence of your absence. Your return kept the bond alive without requiring repair. It let them keep a comforting assumption in the background. They'll be back. And that assumption is powerful. It's not always conscious, but it's soothing. It means they can withdraw and still not truly lose you. It means they can avoid discomfort and still keep access. It means the relationship never reaches a clean ending. It stays floating, which is exactly where avoidant patterns often survive. So when you detach and don't come back, you remove the cushion. And the first person who feels that removal intensely is you. Because your nervous system was trained to respond. Silence used to trigger your pursuit. Distance used to trigger your explanation. Mixed signals used to trigger your effort. Detachment breaks that reflex, and when a reflex breaks, the body panics. That panic doesn't mean you made a mistake. It means you stopped feeding an addiction to uncertainty. It means your brain is looking for the old relief, the quick hit of connection that temporarily calmed your fear. That's why you start bargaining with yourself. Maybe I should send one last message. Maybe I should clarify. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe they think I don't care. But if someone only feels safe to care when you're performing emotional labor, that's not love you can rest inside. That's a system where your peace is always the price. And here is the hardest truth to accept. Your worth will never be accurately measured by an avoidance pursuit. Avoidants often struggle with the very act of pursuing when it involves vulnerability, accountability, and real emotional presence. They might miss you and still not move. They might feel regret and still hide it. They might think about you and still refuse to repair. Not because you weren't significant, but because significance creates pressure, and pressure triggers their defenses. So if you're waiting for them to validate you by chasing you, you're asking the person most afraid of emotional exposure to become your proof. Your proof is not their reaction. Your proof is the reality of what you gave. You gave presence, you gave care, you gave patience, you gave chances, you tried to communicate, you tried to be fair, you tried to be understanding, and at some point, you detached because you realized something that your heart didn't want to admit. You were carrying the relationship on your back. You were doing the work of two people. You were explaining what should be obvious. You were tolerating what you wouldn't advise someone you love to tolerate. Detachment is not you giving up on love. Detachment is you refusing to keep paying for love with your self-respect. It's you refusing to keep proving your worth to someone who benefits from your doubt. Because the moment you start believing, "I didn't matter," you become easier to pull back in. Doubt makes you negotiable. Doubt makes you desperate for scraps of validation. Doubt makes you chase the very person who created the doubt in the first place. So if you're in that space right now, don't ask, "Did I matter?" Ask, Why did I have to work so hard to feel like I mattered? Ask, why did their silence have more power over my mood than my own standards? Ask, why did I mistake longing for love and anxiety for attachment? Because those questions don't shame you, they wake you up. And when your mind tells you, if I mattered, they would come running, answer it with something truer. If I matter, I will not return to a place where I have to disappear to be valued. Because the most powerful thing you did was not detaching from them. It was detaching from the version of you that kept abandoning yourself to keep the connection alive. The version of you that kept returning to prove you were worthy of being chosen. The version of you that kept calling uncertainty, hope, and calling inconsistency, love. Stay to the end, because avoidants don't always show regret the way you expect, but when you don't return, something inside them shifts in stages. This keynote matters because it protects your mind from the most dangerous mistake you can make after detachment, judging the entire story by what you can see on the surface. Most people believe regret looks like pleading, long apologies, dramatic messages. I can't live without you. Sudden vulnerability, public sorrow. And when they don't see that, they assume there's no regret at all. But avoidant regret is often quiet, delayed, hidden, and sometimes even disguised as something else, because regret requires feeling, and feeling is exactly what avoidants learn to control. When you detach, your nervous system wants immediate evidence that you mattered, because evidence calms anxiety. But avoidants are not built for immediate emotional processing in the way a secure person might be. Many avoidants feel first through defense, not through expression. So the first stage is often what looks like indifference. They appear fine, they stay busy, they keep moving, they may even seem relieved. And this is where your mind starts spiraling. I knew it, I was nothing. But stage one is not the truth of their heart, it's the truth of their coping. Coping comes first because the avoidant's nervous system prioritizes control. They regulate by shutting down, they regulate by minimizing, they regulate by distracting. So what you see is calm, but calm can be numbness. Calm can be denial. Calm can be the decision to keep the story small so the feelings don't get big. And one of the biggest comforts they hold, often unconsciously, is the assumption that you will come back. That assumption makes the loss feel temporary. Temporary loss is tolerable. Temporary loss doesn't force accountability. Temporary loss doesn't force grief. So as long as they believe you'll return, they can stay in stage one for a long time, because the pain never has to become real. But when you don't return, the second stage begins, the first crack. The crack is not always romantic longing. It's often discomfort. It's the feeling of something being off. They pick up their phone and there's no message. They scroll and your energy isn't present. They experience a moment and realize they can't reach for you without consequences. The bond starts feeling less like an open tab and more like a closed door. That's the crack, because avoidance can handle distance when it still keeps access, but they struggle when distance costs them access. This stage often shows up as curiosity. Curiosity is how they approach pain without admitting pain. They might wonder about you. They might check your profile. They might watch your stories. They might ask about you through a friend. They might feel a sudden urge to send a casual message. Not because they've fully processed regret, but because their system feels the discomfort of not being able to reach you the way they used to. Curiosity is a safe mask for vulnerability. It lets them look without confessing they miss you. Then comes stage 3, the ego wound. This is where the shift becomes sharper, because your absence communicates something their nervous system can't ignore. You are no longer predictable. In the old pattern, they pulled away and you came closer. They went quiet and you filled the silence. They returned and you reopened the door. That predictability was their safety. It meant they could manage closeness with distance and still keep the bond alive. But when you don't return, that strategy fails. Distance stops being a tool of control and becomes an actual loss. That's why ego gets involved. It's not just, it's, did I lose them? Are they moving on? Did I push too far? Why aren't they reacting like before? Ego doesn't always mean arrogance. Ego means the part of a person that needs to feel in control of what they can access. When that access disappears calmly, it creates an internal alarm. This is often when hovering starts, the breadcrumb message, the casual check-in. And here's what your audience needs to understand to stay safe. Hovering is not the same as repair. Hovering is a test. It's the avoidance way of trying to relieve discomfort, while avoiding the discomfort of accountability. If they can get a warm response, their nervous system calms. They feel the bond is still there. The fear reduces. And then, because the fear reduced, they might withdraw again. That's why so many people get trapped in loops, because they interpret hovering as love and respond with full access, which rewards the test and restarts the cycle. If you don't reward the test with full access, stage 4 begins. Reality becomes unavoidable. This is the stage where true regret can start forming. but only if they have capacity. Because now they can't tell themselves you're still available. They can't rely on the background comfort of your emotional openness. They start replaying moments differently. The times they dismissed your needs, the times they went silent, the times they expected you to understand without communication. And because you didn't come back, they can't avoid the conclusion they may have lost someone who was actually good to them. This is why avoidant regret is often delayed. It arrives when the defenses stop working, when distraction can't override absence, when the door feels closed, when your life continues without them. That's when the feeling slips through, not always as a dramatic confession, but as a quiet ache, a weight, a realization. And because avoidants hate feeling exposed, they often hide it. They turn it into anger. They turn it into the changed. They turn it into they moved on too fast. They turn it into resentment. Because resentment feels safer than regret. Resentment protects pride. Regret requires humility. And this keynote ends with a truth that keeps viewers watching. The stages don't guarantee they'll come back, but they do explain why your absence has power, even when it looks like nothing is happening. The goal is not to extract regret. The goal is to reclaim your peace and stop handing your worth to someone's coping style. Because the most powerful part of detachment is not what it does to them. It's what it stops doing to you. It stops you from chasing proof you mattered, and it teaches you to value yourself even when nobody is clapping for it. Here's the truth: as long as you react, they still feel in control. But when you stay detached, you remove the emotional oxygen that kept the cycle alive. This keynote is the moment your audience finally understands why detachment feels so powerful and so terrifying at the same time. Because what you're really doing isn't disappearing to hurt them. You're removing the fuel that made the entire pattern possible. And once you see the fuel, you stop blaming yourself for not being enough. You start recognizing the system you were trapped inside. In avoidant dynamics, control doesn't always look like manipulation. It often looks like relief. The avoidant pulls away, the pressure drops, and their nervous system calms. Meanwhile, your nervous system spikes. You feel anxious, you feel uncertain, you feel the urge to restore closeness so you can breathe again. So you react, you text, you explain, you send paragraphs, you ask for clarity, you apologize for asking, you try to be softer, easier, more patient. You do it because you think connection will calm you, and it does temporarily. That temporary relief becomes addictive. This is what emotional oxygen really is: the constant supply of your attention, your reassurance, your effort, your willingness to bridge the gap every time they create it. Oxygen is your reaction. Oxygen is the proof you're still emotionally present. Oxygen is the energy you keep pouring into the bond, even when they're not showing up with equal consistency. And here's why it matters. As long as oxygen is flowing, the avoidant doesn't have to face the consequences of their distance. They can withdraw and still feel connected, because your reaction keeps them in your emotional field. Even anger can keep oxygen flowing. Even pleading can keep oxygen flowing. Even "I'm done," followed by another message, can keep oxygen flowing. Anything that says "I am still here, I am still tethered," keeps the dynamic alive. So as long as you react, they still feel in control, because control in this context means something very specific. They can regulate by pulling away and still keep access. Their silence still works. Their distance still produces your pursuit. Their withdrawal still gives them relief without costing them the bond. That's why avoidance can look calm while you feel like you're drowning, because the system is giving them regulation and giving you dysregulation. Their nervous system gets to settle while yours spirals. Now, the moment you stay detached, oxygen stops. And when oxygen stops, everything changes. At first, the avoidant may still look fine, because their system is used to numbness. But inside, something shifts, because now the withdrawal no longer comes with reassurance. Silence no longer produces your chase. Distance no longer guarantees your return. The old strategy fails. And when a strategy fails, it creates discomfort. Not always romantic pain, but a specific kind of agitation. Why isn't this working the way it used to? That agitation is the beginning of consequence. This is why detachment feels like power. Because the power isn't in your words. It's in the removal of predictable supply. Predictable supply is what kept the pattern stable. When you were predictable, they could withdraw and know you'd still be there. When you become steady in detachment, they face something they fear: uncertainty. And uncertainty forces reflection, or it forces testing. But let's bring this back to you, because this keynote isn't about them becoming uncomfortable. It's about you becoming free. The reason you kept reacting wasn't because you lacked self-respect. It was because your nervous system was trying to restore safety. When people don't understand this, they shame themselves. Why did I beg? Why did I chase? Why did I send those paragraphs? But your body wasn't trying to embarrass you. Your body was trying to reconnect. The problem is, in avoidant dynamics, reconnecting becomes a trap because it keeps you in a loop where you always have to earn stability. So detachment is you stepping out of that loop. It's you refusing to keep buying temporary relief with your dignity. It's you choosing a slower, deeper kind of safety, the safety of self-trust. The safety of knowing you can survive silence without collapsing. The safety of knowing your worth doesn't depend on someone's reply. And this is where viewers often struggle, because when you remove oxygen, your body panics. It craves the old drug. It craves contact. It craves just one message, to calm the anxiety. That craving is not love by itself. It's withdrawal from a pattern. It's your nervous system learning that you can feel uncomfortable and still not abandon yourself. That's growth. Now, here's the critical insight for the audience. Oxygen removal reveals intention. If an avoidant comes back only when oxygen is removed, they may not be returning for repair, they may be returning for supply. They want the comfort back, the access back, the reassurance back. And this is why people get trapped again. Because the avoidant reaches out, the viewer feels relief. They flood the connection with warmth, and oxygen returns. And once oxygen returns, the avoidant calms down and often withdraws again. The cycle restarts. So the real win is not that they come back. The real win is that you don't immediately turn oxygen back on without accountability. You don't give full access to someone who hasn't shown real change. You don't let a breadcrumb become a contract. You keep your detachment steady enough that the only way back into your life is through responsibility. This keynote keeps viewers engaged because it gives them a map. It explains why reacting felt necessary. It explains why detachment feels hard. It explains why silence can become consequence. And most importantly, it reframes the story from "I wasn't enough" to "I was fueling a cycle." And when you stop fueling it, you stop being controlled by it. I'm going to break down the hidden timeline, why they look fine at first, and the exact moment the first crack appears when your energy is no longer accessible. This keynote matters because it saves the viewer from the most common emotional mistake after detachment, believing the first reaction is the final truth. When someone detaches and doesn't come back, they watch the avoidance silence and calmness like a scoreboard. Every day that passes feels like a verdict. And the avoidance fine face can feel like a knife, because your pain is loud and theirs looks quiet. So your mind says, if they're fine, I didn't matter. That conclusion is understandable, but it's often inaccurate, because what you're witnessing is not the full emotional story, it's the avoidance protective sequence. Avoidants often experience emotions differently in timing. Many people feel first and process later. Avoidants often protect first and feel later. Their system is trained to stabilize by distancing from vulnerability, and that distancing can look like calm. But calm is not always peace. Calm can be numbness. Calm can be denial. Calm can be dissociation. Calm can be the decision to keep everything manageable by not looking at it too closely. So stage one of the hidden timeline is surface relief. When you stop chasing and disappear emotionally, the immediate pressure drops. No tough talks, no emotional intensity, no expectation to explain themselves. For an avoidant nervous system, that feels like a breath of air. And because they associate closeness with pressure, the absence of closeness can feel like relief. This is why they can look fine at first. They're not necessarily celebrating your loss, they're regulating their body. This is the part the viewer needs to understand deeply. An avoidant can feel relief and still care. Relief doesn't mean you didn't matter. Relief means the pressure ended. And pressure ending is not the same thing as attachment ending. Stage 2 is distraction and control. After the relief, they often fill their time. Work, friends, gym, entertainment, anything that keeps them away from stillness. Because stillness is where feelings rise. Many avoidants don't like stillness because stillness invites vulnerability. So they keep moving. They look busy. They appear unfazed. And to the person who detached, this can feel brutal because you want to be missed immediately. You want some sign. You want proof you mattered. But in their system, proof is delayed by defense. Now comes stage 3, the first crack. The first crack appears when your energy is no longer accessible. And energy doesn't just mean your physical presence. It means your emotional availability, your quick replies, your willingness to soothe them, your predictable forgiveness, the comfort of knowing they can return and you'll still be warm. That's the hidden safety net they often rely on without acknowledging it. So the crack begins when they realize that safety net is gone. It usually starts small, a moment of checking their phone and feeling an unexpected emptiness, a moment of thinking they haven't reached out, a moment of seeing something that reminds them of you, and then realizing they can't casually drop it into your conversation anymore. It's not dramatic. It's subtle, but it's different. Because in the past, even when they withdrew, they could still sense you waiting. They could still feel your emotional presence hovering nearby. But now your presence feels absent. Not angry, not begging, just gone. That absence creates discomfort because it removes control. They can't manage closeness with distance if distance costs them access. They can't calm themselves with withdrawal if withdrawal is now followed by real separation. So their system starts noticing the difference. This is where the avoidance mind starts asking questions, but not always the questions you expect. They don't always immediately ask, "Do I love them?" They often ask, "Are they really done? Why are they not reacting? Did I push too far? What are they doing? Are they talking to someone else?" These questions are not always romantic. They are often about access and certainty. Because the first crack isn't always heartbreak, it's uncertainty. Stage 4 is the ego stir. When you don't come back, it can feel like a quiet rejection to an avoidant, not because you're rejecting them, but because you're no longer available to be managed by the pattern. And that stirs ego. Again, ego doesn't mean arrogance. Ego means the part of a person that wants to feel in control of what they can reach. When they can't reach you the way they used to, they become aware of the loss in a new way. This is often when they start watching from a distance. They might check your profile. They might hover around your name. They might, accidentally, like something. They might send a message that looks casual, but is actually a test. And here's the key: these behaviors often emerge right after the first crack. Because they're attempts to restore comfort. They want to know if you're still there emotionally. They want to know if the door is still open. They want to reduce uncertainty without stepping fully into vulnerability. Stage 5 is where true regret either begins or it gets buried. If they have capacity, the continued absence forces reflection. They start replaying moments. They start realizing that you didn't leave dramatically, you left cleanly. They start recognizing that the old story, "they're too much," doesn't fit because you were calm. And when that story fails, accountability becomes harder to avoid. This is where regret can form, not always as a confession, but as a quiet awareness. I may have lost someone good. If they don't have capacity, they bury it. They turn it into resentment. They tell themselves you changed. They tell themselves you were cold. They rewrite the story so they don't have to feel exposed. That's why many avoidants will act indifferent, even when something inside them is unsettled, because admitting regret feels like admitting need. And this is why the hidden timeline is so important for the viewer, because it reminds them not to chase proof, not to break detachment just to see a reaction, not to confuse the first calm face with the final truth. Because the crack doesn't happen when you beg. The crack happens when your energy is truly unavailable, and the system that relied on your availability has to face a new reality. Then comes the ego wound, because your calm finality hits them with one message they can't argue with. Your silence doesn't control me anymore. And that's when hovering starts. This keynote matters because it explains the moment the dynamic stops being about feelings and starts being about access. People think avoidants return because they suddenly became emotionally brave. Sometimes they do, but very often what brings them back first is not love, it's discomfort. It's the uncomfortable realization that their usual strategy, distance, silence, disappearing, no longer produces the same result. In the old cycle, silence had power because it moved you. It made you anxious, it made you reach, it made you explain, it made you soften. Even if you didn't want to, your nervous system was trained to respond. And every response, even the angry ones, communicated something they didn't have to admit out loud. I'm still here. I'm still attached. That attachment became their hidden comfort. They could pull away and still feel connected because your reaction kept the emotional thread alive. So when you detach and don't come back, their silence stops being a tool and becomes a risk. And that shift is an ego wound. Not ego like vanity. Ego like the part of a person that needs to believe they can still reach what once reached them. Ego like the part that hates uncertainty, hates losing control, hates the idea that someone could truly close a door without slamming it. Because a slammed door can be blamed on drama. A quiet, calm door is harder to explain away. A quiet door suggests choice. And choice is terrifying to someone who relied on your predictability. That's why calm finality hits them differently. Your calm isn't begging. Your calm isn't chasing. Your calm isn't a performance that lets them label you as too much. Your calm is a mirror that says, I can live without this. And the avoidance system reads that as danger, because it means the relationship is no longer floating. It's becoming real enough to lose. This is when hovering begins. Hovering is the avoidance way of touching the edge of the connection without stepping fully into vulnerability. It's a test, a soft knock, a safe little ping that doesn't require accountability. They might like your story. They might send a casual, hey. They might ask an innocent question that doesn't match the depth of what happened. They might suddenly appear in a way that looks random, but emotionally it isn't random at all. It's their nervous system trying to restore comfort, trying to confirm that the door is still open, trying to see if their silence still controls your movement. And here's why this is so important for your audience. Because hovering is exactly where people get pulled back into the loop. A breadcrumb arrives and the heart says, they miss me. But what the nervous system says is, relief. And relief feels like love when you've been starving. So you respond quickly. You respond warmly. You give full access. You start explaining again. You start hoping again. You start rebuilding again. And the moment you do that, the ego wound heals for them. The discomfort goes away. Their nervous system calms. They feel secure again, not secure in the relationship, secure that they still have access to you. And when they feel that access is restored, the urgency disappears. That's why so many avoidance cycles repeat. Not because you weren't valuable, but because you keep turning the emotional oxygen back on before there is real change. The hover was enough to soothe them, so they don't have to grow. The moment you respond like the old you, the pattern becomes safe for them again. So this keynote teaches the viewer a hard but freeing truth. The message, your silence doesn't control me anymore, isn't something you say. It's something you demonstrate. It's demonstrated by not rushing back to restore connection the moment they feel uncomfortable. It's demonstrated by not treating a breadcrumb like a breakthrough. It's demonstrated by staying calm enough to make them meet you in maturity, not in crumbs. And calm here doesn't mean cold. Calm means you don't let your emotions negotiate your standards. Calm means you don't punish them, you simply require structure. Calm means you can say, I'm open to talking, but I'm not doing the disappearing cycle anymore. Calm means you don't turn their return into immediate intimacy. You slow it down, you observe. You let actions do the proving, not promises. Because the real question isn't, did they reach out? The real question is, how did they reach out? Did they acknowledge the pattern? Did they take ownership? Did they show empathy for the impact? Did they offer a plan for what changes next time they feel overwhelmed? Or did they slide in with something vague and safe that asks you to restore connection without addressing what broke it? This is why the ego wound is such a turning point. It reveals what they actually want in that moment. If they want comfort, they'll hover and avoid depth. If they want growth, they'll be willing to have the uncomfortable conversation. And your job isn't to force either outcome. Your job is to stop rescuing them from the discomfort that would lead to clarity. A lot of viewers struggle here because they think holding standards will push the avoidant away. And it might. But if someone is only able to stay connected when you accept crumbs, then the connection isn't love, it's a loop. You are not losing love when you lose a loop. You are losing anxiety. You are losing uncertainty. You are losing the role of emotional caretaker for someone else's fear. So when hovering starts, you don't panic. You don't rush. You don't over-explain. You don't try to win them back with sweetness. You keep your dignity intact and you let the moment reveal the truth. Because that's what detachment is, not a weapon, a filter. It filters out comfort seeking from capacity. And the more calmly you hold that filter, the clearer everything becomes, not in one dramatic scene, but in the way their effort either rises to meet you or fades the moment they realize you're no longer controllable through silence. And in the final part, I'll show you how to tell if their regret turns into real growth or turns into resentment, and why either outcome is your win. This keynote matters because it gives the viewer the one thing they've been missing through the entire cycle, a way to evaluate reality without getting hypnotized by emotion. When someone has lived in an avoidant dynamic, they don't just want love, they want certainty. They want to know what something means. They want to know whether the other person is changing or whether it's the same pattern returning with a softer voice. And because the viewer has been trained by crumbs, any sign can feel like a miracle. That's why they need a clear test. Not a test to manipulate the avoidant, but a test to protect their own peace. Regret can go in two directions, growth or resentment. Growth is when regret leads to responsibility. It's when someone doesn't just feel uncomfortable about losing you. They use that discomfort to change the behavior that caused the loss. Resentment is when regret turns into blame. It's when someone feels uncomfortable, but instead of facing their pattern, they turn the discomfort outward and make you the problem so they don't have to feel exposed. And here's the first thing the viewer must understand. You will not know the difference by words alone. Avoidance can say, I miss you, and still be avoidant. They can say, I'm sorry, and still repeat the same disappearing act. They can promise change in a warm moment and still collapse when intimacy rises again. So the test has to be about capacity, not intention. Capacity shows up in three places: ownership, empathy, and a plan. Ownership is whether they can name their pattern without excuses. A person showing growth will say something like, I shut down and disappear when I'm overwhelmed. I know that hurts you. That's ownership. A person moving toward resentment will minimize, I was busy. I needed space. That's just how I am. Or they'll make you responsible for their reaction. You were pressuring me. Minimizing is the first red flag because it protects the pattern. Ownership challenges the pattern. Empathy is whether they can hold the impact on you without getting defensive. Growth looks like, I can see how confusing and painful that was. Resentment looks like, why are you still on this? You're overthinking. You're making it a big deal. If they can't sit with your feelings for even a minute, they are not ready to rebuild, because rebuilding requires emotional safety, not just contact. A plan is the most important. Growth is not an apology, growth is a strategy. A plan sounds like, next time I feel overwhelmed, I will communicate early, I will ask for space clearly, I'll give you a time frame, I'll come back and talk, I won't disappear. Resentment avoids plans because plans require commitment. Plans require accountability. Plans remove the option to vanish and reset later. So a resentment-driven avoidant will keep things vague. I'll try. I'll do better, let's just see. Vague language keeps the gray zone open. Now here's the deeper test. Do they accept structure? Structure is what avoidant patterns resist. Structure means clarity. Structure means agreements. Structure means consistency. Structure means your needs are not negotiable. Someone showing growth will accept structure because they value the relationship more than the comfort of avoidance. They may feel challenged, but they will engage. Someone slipping into resentment will treat structure as pressure. They'll act like you asking for basic consistency is controlling. They'll act like your boundaries are punishments. That's because resentment wants access without responsibility, and structure blocks that. This is why the simple calm question is so powerful. What will you do differently next time you feel overwhelmed and want to pull away? That question forces ownership, empathy, and a plan in one moment. A growth-oriented person will answer. A resentment-oriented person will dodge, deflect, or attack. And now the most liberating part, why their outcome is your win. If their regret turns into growth, you win because the relationship finally has a chance to become safe. Not perfect, but safe. Safe enough that you're not constantly guessing. Safe enough that you don't have to chase. Safe enough that your nervous system can breathe. Growth means you're no longer loving someone's potential while tolerating their pattern. You're finally seeing action match words. But if their regret turns into resentment, you also win, because resentment reveals what detachment was designed to reveal. It reveals they were not returning because they wanted to build something real. They were